Hey friends, this is the Help and Hope podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries, and I'm Sharon Betters. And our purpose in sharing this podcast is to offer stories of redemption, stories where someone has gone through a really difficult time, a crisis that has been painful, sometimes experienced in isolation, and yet they offer a journey of hope to those who are listening. And so I am really excited to introduce to you our guest today, Christine Chappell, who has been a guest on the Help and Hope podcast before. In fact, we talked about her booklet, Help, I've Been Diagnosed with a Mental Disorder. And today we're going to be talking about her new book, which is called Midnight Mercies, Walking with God Through Depression in Motherhood. And you are in for a real treat. We'll have contact information in the show notes and links to her books and how you can get in touch with Christine. She's got all kinds of fun things on her website about this book that I hope that she'll mention during our conversation. So, Christine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sharon, for inviting me back. I look forward to chatting about this topic. So thanks for the invitation.
Well, I had the privilege of previewing your book, and I just love it. And I pray that God is going to put it into, I know He is going to put it into the hands of people across the world, because it is such an incredible topic that needs to be addressed. And the way that you do it is so effective and transparent. And that's what I love about, one of the things I love about you, Christine, is your transparency and your willingness to share your life with others as a means of encouraging them to walk by faith. But before we get into your story, one of the things that social media lets us do is get a glimpse into people's personal lives. And I've noticed lots of pictures of gardens and flowers. So tell us, what is it about these flowers that is so attractive to you?
Yeah, gosh. Well, I don't know. I think it's just because, especially, trying to write this book, it has taken, from start to finish, really, it was a 3-year process, a lot of ups and downs, and even the attempt of trying to put this together. And so when you are having to kind of reflect on really painful past experiences, and, when the Lord, for me, He's called me to a ministry that just happens to revolve around really dark topics like depression, self-harm, suicide, mental disorders, really painful and sometimes even taboo issues, and really having to step into that type of world, even though I don't live there experientially anymore, having to, my ministry focuses on that. So I'm often, frequenting and revisiting those hard spaces. And so I need beauty, right? I need color and vibrancy and just seeing flowers. And even I've tried my hand at gardening this past year, and that has in and of itself had all kinds of different, parallels to the gospel and how God cares for us. And so I really, I think have experienced, some areas of my faith afresh because of gardening. But, we see so much beauty in the dark world around us by just looking at simple things in creation, and flowers and butterflies and birds happen to be, the things I prefer to look at, just to be reminded, that there is light after darkness. There is life after death, that seasons come and seasons go, and so there's just so much to appreciate, and it's refreshing, to stop and smell the roses, literally. So I do try to do that as often as I can when the roses are in bloom.
Yeah. Well, Christine, you mentioned the context of your work, and Christine is the host of the Hope and Help podcast and a biblical counselor. And so when she says that a lot of her life is spent in the darkness of other people's pain, she's not kidding. You may be listening to our conversation because a friend heard it and said, knowing your own emotional depression, said, you've got to hear what this woman is saying. And so you might be thinking, yeah, right, she doesn't get me at all. So Christine, tell us about your story. Tell us why you thought it was important for you to write this book.
Yeah, I think maybe I'll just kind of focus on the story that I present in Midnight Mercies, but briefly just offer some background in the reality that my first experiences with depression, self-harm, suicide, panic attacks happened as I was a teenager, and I wasn't a believer at the time. It would all kind of a tangled up mess happened in the wake of a car accident and all of the loss that was associated with that. But in Midnight Mercies, I end up sharing the reality that at that time as a teenager, I was hospitalized. I went to the psychiatric hospital because I had been hurting myself at school, and they put me on a suicide watch there for my own protection. But, after my dad died some years later, when I was 28, I became a believer. God saved me a couple of weeks after my dad had died, and I gained my heavenly father after losing my earthly one. And I guess I was a young mom at the time too. We only had one daughter at the time, and she was 5 when I was saved. But I guess I just never really thought that the problems that I had with depression and panic and even temptations to self-harm, would kind of rear their head again in my motherhood experience in a way that was really discouraging as a Christian to go through. You think sometimes, I think the perspective in our Christian walk can be that if I'm growing with the Lord and I'm doing my devotions, then I ought to know better than to do this, give into this temptation, or I ought to be stronger, or I ought to be better, or I shouldn't be this bad. And as we see in Midnight Mercies, just got to a season in my motherhood experience and my own past griefs of losing my father and relational hurts and conflicts and the everyday stresses of having 3 young children and financial difficulties. And we had just moved across the country, so no support network. It just felt like I just didn't want to keep fighting anymore. I didn't want to do life anymore. It was so overwhelming. And I crashed really hard and really just wanted to die. And so Midnight Mercies begins at that point in my journey where I share with my husband how dark my world had become. And I, again, go back to the psychiatric hospital, this time as a wife, as a mother, as a Christian. And the book takes us through a week of wrestling with really difficult thoughts and fears and doubts and anger and all of the different emotions that come with that type of experience in motherhood, where you just get to the point where you say, I can't live like this anymore.
One of the things that I love about your book, first of all, your transparency is remarkable, and you've been transparent all along. As I said, that's one of the things that I really appreciate about you is your transparency, and your purpose in being transparent is to comfort others. And there's no doubt that someone listening right now is saying, I get it. Everything she's saying, I resonate with. What are some of walk us through some of the emotions that you experience, and how does one lead to the other? It's almost like a domino effect.
Yeah, in the book, there are a lot of different emotions under the umbrella of the word depression or the term depression. And that's part of one of my goals of this particular book and sharing my journey is I want to help women to see that, when they say I'm depressed, that's a great starting place, to describe how you're feeling, but you don't want to stop there, because underneath that word, really, it houses so many different emotional facets. And as God is so kind to help us to navigate and explore, what's really going on in our heart and how our heart is responding to our world, we begin to see that, I'm depressed, but maybe what I'm really mean is I'm feeling hopeless, or I'm feeling very weary and sad and angry and anxious and ashamed and lonely. And, when it comes to the experience of depression and motherhood, I'm not saying that these are the only emotions, but these are very common emotions that I think in one way or another, to some degree or another, we experience. And to be honest with you, Sharon, we might not even know that we are experiencing loneliness or shame. We might be shame and depression. What does that even look like? What is weariness and depression look like? Or what is anger in depression look like? That's another one that sometimes surprises people. I've heard people say, well, when I think of depression, I don't think of anger, because anger is, someone punching a hole in the wall, but depression is someone withdrawing from the world, and shutting down. And so on my own journey through depression, I had to learn these things. I had to, in order to take my next step by faith, that through the darkness that I was in, God was helping me to see and better understand some of these experiences. But more than that, help me to see how He views me in the darkness when I feel hopeless, when I feel weary and sad and angry and anxious and ashamed and lonely. Because in depression, our perspective of God is skewed. We're not sure what we believe about His dealings with us or His disposition toward us. It feels like He's, I've been doing a lot of interviews lately, and words that have come up in talking with other women who have gone through this type of thing. God feels like I feel like I've been tricked. I feel like I've been duped. I feel like I've been cheated. I feel like He's being cruel to me. I'm not saying these are right. This is a right understanding of what's going on, but it's helpful to know that this is common. And it's helpful to know that God will meet us there, even there in that moment, and offer us comfort and counsel to have the chance to embrace His perspective and a higher understanding, more than just the dots we're trying to connect in our own pain and confusion.
Yeah. I think when we say the word depression, there's a whole gamut of what that means. For instance, when I was a young mother, we had 3 children. I think it was 3 at the time. And I went to see my doctor, and she looked at me and said, "What's wrong?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Something is not right with you." And I immediately started crying. And the end result was she said, you need to get away. As I described all of my responsibilities and how I felt at the time, I didn't even know how badly I felt, but something just wasn't right. Now, I was not in a clinical depression. I was struggling with motherhood and busyness and all of that. And so her answer was, tell your husband you have to get away. You have to get, as a pastor's wife, you have to get away from all of that. And so he immediately arranged for me to have a break and all of that. And so fortunately, like I said, I was not in a clinical depression, but I think we use that word a lot. So when you use the word depression, what do you mean?
Yeah, and that's the tricky thing with depression, isn't it, Sharon, is that everyone comes at this particular problem from a different perspective, a different worldview, a different understanding. And you're absolutely right. A lot of the therapeutic terms and diagnoses kind of have taken on their own momentum in just the way that we dialogue in everyday conversation. And so someone might understand depression as, oh, well, this person's just in a bad mood, or they're just having a bad attitude and they need to get over it. Or another person might think, oh, this, if you say I have depression, then you're saying that you have a medical issue that, you just need to take a medication and then you'll feel better in a couple of weeks or 4 weeks once it gets into your system, whatever it is. And so for me, when I present the term depression in Midnight Mercies, I actually don't put it into a box. Because I think that's part of the danger, is to oversimplify the problem. I like to talk about depression as an experience. This is something that we go through in response to the world around us, even in our own bodies. We are hearts. We are physical beings and spiritual beings, and our hearts are always responding to our physical limitations and what's going on with our bodies that we can't always identify, our relational issues that we engage in, the society, the culture around us. We're talking about natural disasters that are happening in our world today. So when I talk about depression, of course, it's an experience of, deep pain and confusion where you feel like maybe, darkness has become your friend. No one understands. There's no hope for me. My family would be better off without me. How am I ever going to be useful again? I can't see, past this pain. It's just an experience of grief mingled in with a whole bunch of other sense of hopelessness a sense of purposelessness, a sense of sorrow. I mean, it's so tangled up. And for someone to be diagnosed clinically, of course, there are a lot of symptoms that go along with that. I'm not going to rehash those lists because you can look them up online. But I think that it's wise to approach this experience as something much broader than trying to fit it into particular categories of, oh, this is purely physical. Oh, this is purely spiritual. Oh, this is purely, whatever other categories might exist. And recognize that it's just part of a normal human experience that sometimes gets very disruptive in our life and every day. And to the extreme, we see where people get to the point like I did, where they just don't want to go on, that the pain and the hopelessness is so dire that life's just not worth living anymore if they have to continue to live that way. And so that's, of course, that one thing I think really distinguishes depression from regular grief is the danger component. Because, in regular grief, especially if we're able to engage in the Lord, we have those pains and the confusions and the questions, but we're able to perceive him as a real and present refuge, to work those things through. But in depression, it can feel like there's some kind of disconnect with the Lord. Has he abandoned me? Has he forsaken me? Why has he not helped me to feel better yet? I'm doing all the things, and because he may not seem like a real and present refuge at the time, for whatever reason it might be, we may be tempted to turn to false comforts, to false refuges like alcohol, self-harm, pornography, and all of these other things that really serve to deepen our despair and hopelessness instead of, alleviate some of it. So.
A lot of what you're saying, I feel as though we need somebody to come alongside of us to help us unpack all of those different emotions that you're talking about. I really appreciated your insight into that it could be emotions that we haven't even realized are all tangled up in the depression, causing the depression. And at Mark Inc., we have started Anchored Hope Biblical Online Counseling, which is biblical counselors who are ready and equipped to help to come alongside of you. And so if you are listening and you're saying, oh man, that's exactly how I feel, or I feel like I'm in neutral, or I'm desperate, please go to helpandhopenow.org. That's helpandhopenow.org, and check out Anchored Hope for counseling, and look for biblical counseling. If Anchored Hope isn't for you, look for a biblical counselor. Christine is a biblical counselor, and there are other avenues out there, but please don't hesitate to ask for help for someone who is equipped and trained, ready to come alongside of you to walk this pathway with you. One of the things that I just loved about your book, Midnight Mercies, is you remind us of people in Scripture who struggled with depression. And when I went through my own grief journey, that was such an encouragement to me. So do you have a favorite? And the other thing, Christine, that I loved is the way you showed how God dealt differently with each person, that he did not have a cookie cutter approach to their emotions, and he acknowledged their emotions. So thank you for that. I think that shows us something about the character of God. But tell us, do you have a favorite, or what drew you to these people?
Yeah, gosh, they're just all so important in their own right. I think maybe I think the common answer would probably be the story of Elijah. And there are a lot of reasons for that. But, yeah. And while I might normally go that way, the Spirit is leading me actually to land first on the story of Moses in Numbers, where Moses really, I just talked about the fact that, sometimes we just have these meltdown moments in motherhood, whether we are clinically depressed or not, where we just get fed up and we're hopeless, and we just feel suffocated by the pressures and the responsibilities and the roles and the demands and all of the layered losses and trials. And, sometimes it just feels like one thing after the other. And that's really where I think Moses was at this one point in Numbers. I can't remember off the top of my head, but it's a narrative I go over in chapter 1, which talks about hopelessness, which, as we said, is a key component of depression. That's what sets it apart from regular grief. And the danger is, like what we see in Moses, I call it that he's having a total meltdown moment, because his heart gets exposed when, the Israelites, they're constantly complaining. For over and over and over, they're just like disobedient sheep that keep wandering and just not doing what they're supposed to do. And he just gets so fed up, and he, basically, I'm not saying this is the right response at all, but he really lets loose on the Lord. And gets to the point where, he says, if this is how you're going to treat me, he's talking to God. This was God's, they were best friends. You know what I mean? That's what the scriptures describe. No one had spent more time in the face-to-face presence with the Lord than Moses. So this is not some unbeliever. This is not some immature Christian. This is someone who had an intimate, personal relationship with God. And even he had a meltdown where he said, God, if this is how you're going, how do you expect me to deal with this, Lord? How do you expect me to be able to feed all these people? He actually says something like, am I their moms? Am I supposed to be the mother here? Where do you expect me to get all this food? If this is how you're going to treat me, just kill me now. I'm done. And I'm paraphrasing, of course. But yeah. I think that, if there are listeners who are feeling that way right now, that it is important to know how God responded to Moses in that moment. And it was a response that was full of grace and understanding and assistance, because God gave Moses a piece of counsel there in the midst of his meltdown moment. And the counsel was, you need to go find some spirit-filled believers who can share this burden with you. Go get them, and I will come and talk with you when you're all together. And I'm totally paraphrasing this in my own Christine way. But I think just that, because we have to start there, Sharon. We cannot extinguish the fires of hopelessness on our own. And that will be the temptation in depression, is I'm just going to figure out how to handle this. I'm going to figure out how to do better and pull myself up. And I don't want to invite anyone else in on the struggle. And there's a lot of different reasons that we might not want to invite others. I'm not going to go into that now, but that's the mentality we can embrace, is I got to figure this out. I got to be stoic or whatever it is. But God's counsel to us in those meltdown moments is find spirit-filled, spiritual first responders, right? Who you could call to come help to extinguish these fires, because they will take you down. You can't fight the flames on your own. And so that's the narrative I went to today for that question. And hopefully that's helpful.
I love it. I love that story. And I love, how mad he gets at these kids, God's kids. It's so realistic the way that you describe it. It's every mother out there is saying, I've had those moments. And that leads me to one of the things that you said. You say, I got this is the cry of a supermom, but help is the cry of a saint who knows her need. And, in our culture, I got this seems to be the cry of all. It's a prideful thing. I can do this. So what is the difference between the two?
Yeah, well, I think you just described. I think pride is the difference, but I think also too, maybe a misunderstanding of what it means to be strong in your faith. The Christian faith is not meant to produce self-sufficiency or to drive us towards self-reliance. It's not, I am a good and faithful Christian when I feel really strong and victorious all the time. And so I'm always going to have within myself the knowledge and the wisdom and the resources I need to navigate all of my problems on my own. And then everyone will look at me and say, oh man, she's doing a great job. She's spinning all these plates and none of them are falling. And, kudos to her. And that's in some ways, like you say, pride can be fueling that, even a desire for glory, right, to be a glory thief. And because, hey, that feels pretty good to be able to handle your life, and smile while you're doing it, even though you've got a lot on your plate. But I think, God is not in the business of nurturing that tendency in us. He's not interested in sharing his glory. He's not interested in helping us to become more self-sufficient and more self-reliant. Earlier this year, someone asked me if I would had a response about, resiliency is kind of or to be resilient is kind of like a common word or a popular word right now, resilience, and talking about that. And like, what was my understanding of resilience? And she asked me just off the cuff. I had no time to even really think about it all that much. But to me, from a Christian perspective, resiliency is full dependence on God. If you want to be resilient, you rely fully on the Lord and not yourself. Just like Paul talks about in 2 Corinthians 1, where he talks about this experience in Asia that was so distressing for him and his colleagues that they felt like they had received the sentence of death. They despaired of life itself. This was such a bad situation they were in that they didn't even think they were going to survive it. And I know that there are moms listening right now where that's where they're at. And that's what they feel like. This is so bad. What I am going through right now is so bad. This situation, this circumstance, this trial, this loss, I don't even think I'm going to survive it. It feels like a death sentence, right? But even Paul, he goes on and he says, yeah, that was the reality. He's honest about it. He's not shoving that away. But he says that served the redemptive benefit of getting him to rely on the God who raises the dead and not himself. And that's the goal, right? That is our goal as we mature in Christians. It's like the more mature you are in Christ means the more quickly you are to run to God and full and complete abandon of like, I have no resources in me, God, but you have what I need. And I'm depending on you to get me through this. Not I got this, but God help, because I can't do this without you.
Yeah. Well, I hate to say that we're going to be wrapping up, and because I could just talk to you all day. I could listen to the wisdom that you have to share all day long, Christine. But what we like to say around here is, friends, we hope that this conversation is like salty peanuts. You can't just eat one. You got to have more. And so I hope, and I'm confident you're going to want to hear more from Christine. And so I highly recommend her book, Midnight Mercies. I'm sure that you can tell it's packed with so much wisdom and so much truth and so much scripture. And really, she doesn't make it, her story is like the framework, but the heart of it is God's grace. And I just want to encourage you to check it out. You can go to helpandhopenow.org, where you can learn more about how to get in touch with Christine, her website. We'll have links to her books as well. But Christine, as we wrap up, I would like to give you one more opportunity to offer the hope of the gospel to that one woman who you just described her. She's just hanging on, and she's listening to you, and she says, this woman gets me, but I have no idea what to do next. If you had just a minute with a woman like that, what practical steps could she take to begin a journey toward healing?
Well, I think just picking up on the Moses story, and if you are not having someone by your side, whether virtually or in person, preferably through the local church, walking with you, just one person, one person who is mature in their faith, who can walk with you during this season, that would be my first recommendation. Like, do not overlook the importance of that. God will meet you there with that person, right? He says, get these spirit-filled believers, sit with, and then I will come and talk to you. He will illuminate the next step for you through the comfort and counsel that other spirit-filled believers have to share. We're not going to be able to access the comfort and counsel we need just in our own selves all the time. We have to hear it from other people, spirit-filled believers in particular. And then the only other thing I would just leave as an encouragement is that you have not lost the treasure of the gospel, even in this season of darkness, that sometimes just to make it through the day, you're living 5 minutes at a time and saying, Lord, what next? Who do you want me to serve in love next? How can I lay my life down? I mean, sometimes we even have to embrace the mentality that right now, Lord, help me die to my desire to die. that help me to choose life in this moment. And a lot of times choosing life in this moment just looks like the next step. What next life sustaining step does God have for me right now? And maybe it's eat a sandwich. Maybe it's drink some water. Maybe it's brush your teeth or read a book to your kid or do the dishes. But it's small and it's immediate. God puts it right in front of you. And so whatever that is, you can take that step and expect him to give you the strength you need to walk into that step by faith.
Christine, thank you so much. I just love talking to you and hearing your perspective. And I really like what you just said. It's exactly the truth. I've walked that myself, and it's like medicine for your soul. It just a little bit at a time. Friends, my guest today is Christine Chappell, and we've been talking about her wonderful book, Midnight Mercies, Walking with God Through Depression in Motherhood. Walking with God Through Depression in Motherhood. And I cannot recommend her book enough. It's practical, it's biblical, it's personal, it's transparent. And I think it could be life-changing for those who are really struggling with depression and those who want to come alongside of them. It gives you insight into the heart of the person who is struggling with depression. And I told Christine it's not just for mothers. Really, the truths, the principles apply right across the board for anyone who is struggling with depression. So I guess you can tell I'm highly recommending this book. I'm Sharon Betters, and this is the Help and Hope podcast produced by Mark Inc. Ministries. You can hear more stories like Christine's by going to helpandhopenow.org. That's helpandhopenow.org, where you're going to find lots of other free resources designed to help turn your heart toward Jesus, especially in those broken places of life. Thanks so much for joining us, and I hope that you will share this with others. Help us spread the word. The best advertisement is a personal review. So make sure you pass this along to someone else who is looking for the help and hope of the gospel.